Okay, looks like we're live. Let me go back to Zoom. Live on Facebook. All right. Let me just do one last thing and we'll get started. Can you hear me, Ron?
I can.
Perfect. All right. I think, all right, we're good to go. How's my audio sound? Pretty good?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So anyways, welcome, Ron. Thank you for being here today. We had a little bit of technical difficulties getting started, but we got that out of the way. We're a little bit past 2 o'clock already, but wanted to jump in. Today's meeting is to talk a little bit of what we talked about last week regarding the break-even. Last week, we went in depth on the break-even analysis and the cash flow forecast. We have a video on YouTube on that. I recommend everybody go back and watch that. In addition to that, we did have some follow-up subjects. We were trying to stay within the hour, which is the reason why we are going to go back and recap a little more on the break-even and the cash flow. There was also some additional information that Ron brought to my attention that I wanted to share with everyone. And that's kind of where today we wanted to go back and talk a little more about that. In addition to that, we wanted to see if we can share a story of a company, similar situations about more than 10 years ago that went through a similar situation where there was disruption in the business and they were able to figure a way how to use marketing, reporting, using some of these tools we're displaying to come back with not only survive, but thrive after that. Today, we are streaming from the enterprise. I also want to kind of share something real quick about the enterprise. It's in downtown San Bernardino. It's a place where we're looking to continue growing the development of small business, turn into like a center for growth of businesses and continue growing the technology and resources for the small business community and entrepreneur community. With that said, I have Ron Burgess with Micro Giants, and I want to introduce yourself real quick, Ron.
Sure. Yes. I've been a small business person over the many years that I've been doing this. I've started 6 or 7 businesses, but my primary occupation has been as a consultant to small business for about 35 years. And during that time, I've had an opportunity to compare what I learned in business school to what small business people really need and really use and what's really relevant, and discovered that there are a lot of things that are different. Small business is not big business, just small. It's an entirely different animal. And so Micro Giants is a nonprofit. That's what I do now that I'm mostly retired, that focuses on mentoring small business people who want to get started and who might have started recently, and then also we advocate for small business based on our knowledge base.
I've been I think I mentioned this before. I've been part of the Micro Giant program for almost a year now, and it truly changed my perspective on business. It's helped me out a lot, not only in my personal life, but on other people that I help with their businesses, including the school in Mexico and things like that. So I want to thank Ron for all that. And I wanted to dive in with the topic you were mentioning about the restaurants with the soft opening. You mentioned last time to me that might necessarily be a topic of concern to maybe bring some attention to it for restaurants are opening their doors with the new social distancing rules or the fear of people going into restaurants in a crowded base, that they might not be ready to open, and there might be some harsh realities that we might have to speak about. And I wanted to see maybe we can talk about that today.
Yeah.
Nice. So with that said, Ron, I wanted to see if I can open up the mic to you on what we talked about, the restaurants.
Sure. Yeah. Just a little bit of a refresher for those of you who may not have seen what we had done. You can go back and take a look at it now. But we really talked about using a couple of tools. One is a real cash flow projection, which is not a financial statement that you typically get from an accountant. The other one is a break-even analysis, which is normally used for manufacturing and rarely used for businesses. The reason that it's important to think in terms of a break-even is that expenses are broken into both fixed expenses and variable expenses. Fixed expenses or direct expenses, two names for the same thing, is all of the things that you have to pay for in order to start the business up, to walk in the door every day. That means in order to be able to get, literally walk in your door, you have to have a rent, or you have to own the building. You've got to have your equipment. You have to be able to turn the lights on. You may have a receptionist at the front door who gets paid a salary. And all of those things that you have to pay for before you do a single dollar of business. Variable expenses or indirect expenses, same thing, two different names, are those expenses that accrue to your costs as you do the business. So the more business you do, the more it costs you. Typically in a restaurant, since that's our subject today, you don't really have a cost until somebody orders a meal. And yes, you do have inventory in the back because you got to have the raw food in order to make the meal. But as you're making that meal, you're accruing costs against your revenue. So if your costs are about a third of what your retail is, or your menu price is, then that means that about 30 to say 35 to 33%, but 30 to 35% of your costs are what we would consider variable costs. What is left over after you pay your variable costs is called margin, or gross margin. And so it's the gross margin that provides the money that pays for your fixed costs. So in the break-even analysis that we did, we simply illustrated kind of what that looks like in a chart form, so that a business owner, in this case a restaurant, would be able to identify exactly how much volume it takes in order to hit a break-even point. That point where you're not making money and you're not losing money. You're just right in the middle, zero money. And so that's kind of where we ended up, plus a few other questions. Last time we did talk a little bit about some marketing ideas about how can you boost your volume if you happen, in this particular case, if you happen to have a takeout business. The break even is interesting because that tells a company whether they should go back to business or not, and how much volume they have to have before they're going to start making money, as I mentioned. The scary part about this, and I've been thinking about this all week, the scary part about this is that even if you have PPP funds from the government that will help you pay for your employees, that may seem like a lot of money just coming in to your bank account. It's a loan unless you can keep everybody employed. So that has to be used to pay for employees. 75% of that has to be used to pay for employees. So that seems like a pretty nice gift from heaven, really. But the problem here is that you've only paid for a small percentage of your actual costs. And once you start back into business again, you now have to pay about a third of your costs for food. And then you also have your rents to pay, and you've got your utilities to pay, and your supplies to pay, and a whole bunch of fixed expenses. So the question then is, well, how much do you need in order to be able to make money? So the new opening regulations, they're different by state, of course, but the new regulations for those states that are open, we're not really, there are very many of us in California open yet, but for those that are open, they're talking about, proper spacing and distancing, and of course, all the other personal protection, which is all a good thing and important to keep customers feeling safe in your restaurant. The question is, if they allow you to have 25% of your tables filled or 50% of your tables filled, is that enough revenue to be able to make money or break even? The answer appears more and more, it appears no, that's not really the case. Um, many restaurants are very different. Some have a lot of takeout business, some have none. I read where one McDonald's was doing 90% of their revenue in takeout today, and it had gone up a little bit from where it was before they shut down. But literally, they were only doing 10 to 20% inside at tables. So their business isn't as bad as maybe you might think. But for a full service sit down restaurant where people are not don't tend to come in and buy things, nicer restaurants, for instance, that they would take home, they don't have that opportunity. So there's a range. That's my point is there is a range here. But the range appears to be somewhere between 80 to 90% occupancy, meaning 80 or 90% of your tables need to be filled in order to be able to make any money. So if you're break even, this is a slightly different calculation, but than our break even, the way we broke it into pieces. But if you think of the number of tables you have, and you consider how much turnover you have, meaning how many times did somebody sit down at a specific table. A typical lunch, a nice lunch restaurant might turn their tables twice during lunch. And so now if you hypothetically say only 25% of those tables can be filled, and you can turn them twice, then would you make money? And the answer is almost surely no. What it used to take to make money was you had to turn the lunch tables 85% of your capacity, and then the same with dinner. You had to have an 85% capacity at dinner. In other words, you need to now dinner, of course, you turn your tables more. So that's why you might see more vacancies at dinner, vacant tables. But so if you can only put 25% at a time in your restaurant, you can see how you're going to have a lot of expenses that are going to go on. All of those fixed costs are literally the same. You've got the same hostess, you've got the same gas bill, electric bill, you've got to pay rent. You may have some help on that from your landlord, I hope so, but you still have that as a cost. You still have, typical supply costs. You have higher cleaning costs than you've ever had before because you're rubbing everything down. Literally, you probably have higher labor costs in order to do that. And so the situation doesn't look good if you can only open a certain amount of your restaurant. So the concern there is that you would open your restaurant thinking that things are going to get better, but they get worse. So if you've used up most of your cash during this time, and you believe that getting started is better, chances are that they won't, that they will actually get worse. And so it's very, very important for you to do two things, and that is to use the two tools, the break-even analysis, and also to take a look at your cash flow and use the cash flow format to be able to determine, how much cash you have in the bank, if you have any receivables, how much you have to pay for, any loans that you've received, trying to make sure that you can keep your bank account as high as possible. And then how long will it take before, if you're going to lose money every month, how long will it take before that hole in the bucket, as we illustrated last week, how big does that hole get, and can you ever catch up? And of course, that leads to the issue of, well, how bad can that be, and what are the alternatives there?
Ron, so that opens up a lot of comments, potential follow-up questions, and things that maybe we can talk about. But one thing you mentioned, and maybe I can just almost like a recap, is when thinking of restaurants, maybe it'd be a good idea to start categorizing what type of restaurant you really fall under, right? So if you're a business that's a restaurant that's mostly focused on sit downs and you've never done delivery before, ever, and now you're basically running fire drills to say, okay, we need to figure out how to turn this massive fixed cost food business into not only now serving tables at a, let's say, 50% capacity, but now how to figure out a way how to replace the other 50% doing some sort of other business with this fixed asset, which would be the kitchen and things like that. Now, we talked about creative ways how to get there, which was obviously marketing using technology to go, like everybody's seems to be a very common and obvious trend. But the thing that I'm trying to figure it out is it something that maybe we should calculate, like you mentioned before, to understand, yes, we are going to make it. We only have 2 months to test the concept, because if we don't hit these numbers, do it be a delivery or be a whatever creative way we are bringing more business other than sit down. So we put a stop to the bleeding bucket and say, this is as far as we're going to take it before we ran out of cash or turn our, basically it's time for us to cut our losses and say, yeah, maybe it's time to close down, regroup, and go back to work. I feel like those that never had the technology in place, and those businesses that, are completely sit down, rely on sit down, they're going to be the ones that are going to have a hard time adapting to these new rules. And I mean, I guess the question of the point is, it's using these calculations to say, when is it time to say enough is enough? Let's close down. Even though it hurts, we've been in business 30 years. It's time to close and regroup, collect our cash, collect our costs, and start again.
Yeah, those are tough questions. It faces reality, square in the face, those are tough. To kind of answer your first question a little bit, if you primarily have a sit-down restaurant, then you have a certain kind of expense structure. You may have more fixed costs because perhaps your only variable costs are, food percentage of, whatever it costs to create the meal, and maybe the waitresses. You might even have some cooks that come in when you're busy and some that are just there when you're not busy. So you have this combination of fixed and variable costs. Then if you decide to do a new business, like you want to have a walk-in and take out business, or even a delivery business, you really have to take a look at it as a separate business, because the costs are now a little different. You don't want to start a new revenue stream and create more expenses than the revenue brings in, right? And so that can be a dilemma. In the scramble to keep things going, bad decisions are often made. And that's because many times the reports are not there to help the owner make the decision. If you are just looking at your checking account to see how things are going, and you see that your checking accounts are really low, a lot lower than you normally keep it, then you begin scrambling to bring in some kind of revenue to be able to fill that bucket up again. But if you're not careful, you also create new holes in the bucket. An example might be that if you decide you're going to get in the delivery business and you get started, and you say you do reasonably well, but now you need a new truck because you can't deliver to everybody with your one broken down old truck that you never really used for delivery before. So you get another truck, and now you've got a new expense. So what's your break even on the truck? I have a client that just bought 4 brand new step vans. They were $60,000 each. And they were lucky because they anticipated they would need it. But when the virus hit, everybody sold out of those, and their delivery went to 6 months. So some of these things you can't get into and jump into as fast as you might expect that you can. Nevertheless, you could probably, baling wire and bubble gum together some kind of a vehicle and get out there and do something, but it doesn't happen without some cost. And so you need to think of a new little break even as part of your existing business. So use the same tool, but you break out some of the fixed costs, which would apportion to, say, your your delivery business, and then you apply the proper variable costs to that, and you determine if that little business by itself can actually bring in some additional real revenue, and I should say real profit, some cash flow that can be used to pay some of the other expenses. Once you've got a margin on that product and you've paid the fixed costs that you've allocated towards that piece of the business, the extra money left over can now be applied to, say, the empty restaurant that you have sitting there that you're not using, or it can help make up the difference because you're only 50% occupied. And therefore the point is you really have to take a look at each of these little sub businesses as their own business, their own cost centers. You can make bad decisions. When I was in business, in the retail business, I had 7 stores. I had to know that every one of the 7 stores was making money. And I had to have a financial statement for every single store. One of my clients, they have 35 or 40 trucks, same one I mentioned. We treat each one of those trucks like its own business. They have a revenue they bring in, they have costs that are associated with that. And so literally we calculate profit on per truck. So we don't do financial statements on 40 some trucks, but we do management reports on 40 some trucks to show what their labor costs are, what their fixed costs are, what the repair rates are, against even depreciation on that given truck, which ones make money, which ones don't make money. And then you analyze the routes that they're on to see if you can actually change the route or change the volume per truck. So we utilize these kinds of tools at a really detailed level in order to be able to solve the problems of what do you spend money on and what do you stop doing. I'm not sure I answered each one of those questions. And I've lost your audio.
Sorry, I was still mute. It gets a little more clarity of kind of what to do when it comes down to getting into a brand new business model, utilizing existing, I guess, assets like the kitchen on your business. But I do have a question. If I'm a restaurant and I'm a sit-down restaurant only, and yes, maybe I do have I want to go ahead and create a side business. What would be a good way to categorize? I mean, the kitchen alone, it's one business, and that would mean that the truck and whoever I'm putting there to drive it, that should be the reporting. I don't have to necessarily marry in my report the kitchen anymore because it's already been handled by the original way of source of revenue. So it would be just the truck, the driver, and then whatever revenue we make out of there. Would that be a good way to separate those revenues?
Well, you could, but you see, the assumption that you make there is that when you say that the kitchen's already been handled by the other business, that's a bad assumption now. And the reason it's a bad assumption is because if we're only at 50% occupancy, we're losing money. And so the kitchen's losing money too. So you have to kind of say, well, how much space? It's manufacturing. When you're making something, including food, that's really manufacturing. So if you're using, you've got 2 griddles and you're using one of them for, for your regular restaurant business, and say the other one is for delivery, I would say let's allocate the cost for each one of those so that we know really what's happening here. And you can do it easier than that. You don't have to, count out every square foot of the kitchen and say, this is where we're going to do it. Although some people do stuff like that. But what you can do is you can say, my cook, my chef works 30% of his time on the go-to, the delivery menu, and 70% of his time, the rest of his time goes to the regular restaurant. So you could say, I'm going to take 30% of his costs and I'm going to plug that in to the delivery side of the business so that you can have a really good idea. It's real easy to think you're doing well but really be losing money on a single operation. And so in a case like that, if you're, say you are at break even or you're making money in a regular restaurant in the good old days before the COVID-19 came along, then you have people who would say, well, it's all plus business because it's already paid for. Well, you're right. In that case, if you're making money, it's plus revenue, but it doesn't help you understand if that revenue is actually covering its costs. And so say you do $100,000 in go-to business, in the delivery business. Well, are your food costs the same? Yeah, but the packaging's not the same. You've got to put in a package, maybe you bag it up. Maybe it has to have special handling because of the virus. Maybe you have to, like I mentioned, you have to spend a bunch of time cleaning out the truck once a night or 5 times a night, whatever the standards are. So, to assume that the revenue that you are receiving is enough to cover the expenses is not always a great idea. You need to break those out. Big businesses do this with SBU, strategic business units. They break things down down to department level, that sort of thing. And they do that for a simple reason, and that is they want to know where they're making money and where they're losing money, because they want to make more money and they want to lose less money. And so you have to keep track of those numbers in order to be able to make reasonable decisions. There are some natural born business people out there that have a really good mathematical minds that can kind of go through the exercise mentally and say, well, I'm spending this much money on this and this much money on this, and here's a certain percentage, and they can figure this stuff out kind of almost automatically. I don't run into very many of those people. They're out there. I've known a few of them. But you have to have a memory that can remember the price of everything you bought that day and for several days prior to that. That's a pretty interesting kind of a memory, and I don't run into that very often.
That is, that's very funny you mentioned that, because often I look at these businesses that without any reports, without no accounting, somehow we started from bottom, I guess you can say, and they grew to be these businesses. And when I see their process, it's basically on their mind. I have maybe 2 people I can think of right now that I can't believe they're doing what they're doing. I can't believe they're able to keep it. But it's you're right. It's these mathematical minds, this intuition that kicks in and says, this is a profitable move. This is not a profitable move. I don't need to do a break even. I don't need to do any of that. And I don't have time for that. But I think what it comes down to is there has to be a limit to that mathematical mind, where intuition's great, or knowing that there is a way that you're going to make money by making that move. But I think it does come down to, well, instead of just guesstimating, right? You have the potential of now have to take that physical risk, maybe taking the time sharpening the saw before cutting instead of spending half an hour cutting a tree, and taking that 3 minutes to sharpen the saw. Might help these mathematical people or these minds take it to the next level. But it's an interesting subject to say that, because I feel like I run into a lot of business that they lost so much that they already know when they're making money or not without no reports in the first 5 to 10 years when they're running their businesses.
Yeah.
And so,
and there are things that sneak up on you too. There are some businesses that the margins are pretty great. They start out slow. They have a very low standard of living. Everything goes back into the business. They gain money in their checking account. They think they're successful. They buy inventory. They're buying land or whatever the case may be, and they continue to grow. I remember doing work years ago on a hardware store that was in a little town in the Midwest. They had been in business for 50 years. They had always had cash in the bank, because the mindset was, we're in the hardware business, hammers don't go out of style. And so we just keep buying inventory, make sure we have everything. If anybody comes into the store, we are going to be able to take care of that. We're going to be able to do it. So there was enough money in the business. They, in fact, were making money. There's enough money in the business to be able to continually buy more inventory and actually accumulate inventory. So you had this business that was doing $400,000 or $500,000 a year in business, making money. And he was slowly investing in inventory because, after all, hammers don't go out of style. Well, the problem was that he had filled his basement up. He had filled his second floor up, and he was now filling his attic up with inventory. So he thought that he was accumulating money during his lifetime in his business. But when it came time to sell the business, no one would pay him for that inventory. And the reason was it wasn't worth anything. Hammers had changed. Things are not the same. And so all this old inventory was looked at, it was examined by customers and rejected year after year after year. He had too many of this kind of hammer, too many of these nails, not enough of these screws. And if he needed more, he bought them, but he never did anything about clearing out his inventory. So he thought he was going to be worth over $1 million. He could only get $200,000 for that. He never did make any money, but he thought he was making money. He just thought he had it invested in inventory, but the inventory was devaluing every year. And so really, when he thought he was a millionaire, he barely had enough money to retire. That can happen. I've seen it happen.
How would that scenario of sneaking up on you think, with your experience, might fall in place with a restaurant owner in this case? Maybe not adapting to goes, the
Well,
Eats.
you're not going to have that kind of a long-term problem with a restaurant owner because stuff, it rots, right? But you do have a lot of waste in restaurants, and sometimes restaurants don't monitor that the way that they should, and therefore they don't really know. But you do benchmarking. So if you have a Mexican food restaurant, and the average sit-down Mexican food restaurant has, we'll say, 40% of cost of their merchandise, cost of goods sold, and for some reason yours is 45%, you have to ask yourself the question: are we wasting food? Are we putting too much in our burritos? Are we not charging enough because our food is excellent and there's a bigger serving? You just, not that you'll change anything necessarily, but you have to ask yourself that question. You have to say, why are we not tracking with everybody else? So there are lots of benchmarks there. The cost of waiters for your specific kind of restaurant, your wait staff, the vehicles that you may or may not have compared to others, supplies. So all of the expenses need to be benchmarked against the industry, just so you can see how you're doing. Now, having said that, and kind of going back to your previous comment, there's this, I guess I'll just call it a syndrome. I'm going to call throw mud on the wall syndrome. And that is that with 80% of our businesses going broke in 5 years, there's a lot of mud that gets thrown on the wall. 20% of it sticks. Now, is that because they knew what they were doing, or they just landed in the right place? And so when we talk about not having reporting and not paying attention to these things, the chances of somebody who's running their business like that is that they're one of those pieces of mud that happen to stick. They didn't do it. They didn't necessarily, something is going well. If they're in a perfect location, if they're a great chef, great cook, people love the food. If you've got people who are good waitstaff, if everything just happens, and they may be directing that too, but with all of those things happening, if you're not paying attention to your numbers, chances are you are just some mud that's stuck on the wall. You're not responsible for your success. That happens. It happens a lot. I can verify to you, after doing this for decades and decades, that many of the successful businesses that think they're wonderful entrepreneurs were successful one time, and that one time they were lucky. You don't, you get a lot luckier if you know your numbers.
And speaking of luck, can numbers expose if it were where the luck was by utilizing report?
Sure, absolutely they can. Because if you discover that you're doing a superior product, you got the best burritos in town, people love them, and your food costs are 30% instead of an average of 45%, you can say, wow, not only do we deserve to stay in business, but there must be some genius in here who can actually pull this off. Let's do a lot more of this. Because we're not, if we can keep our costs in line like that, we're going to make money. And making money is how you stay in business. Everybody knows that. But in times like today, those businesses that are stretched out and have a lot of loans, don't have a lot of cash, they're not going to make it. And so making money helps the survivors survive.
Can I give an example of my perception of this conversation of getting lucky and identifying it through numbers?
Sure.
Let's say you went through a restaurant, you started now doing reporting for every item. Not only did you find out the cost of a burrito, but also how much you're selling it. You found out the profit margins of it. And then you realize that your most popular dish is actually losing money than making you money. And then some other items are not as popular, but say the second most popular one happens to be the more profitable one. Then you have the ability at that time to know maybe this is what, or let's say these are the 4 items that maybe we can open up a side express branch with these items because they're more profitable based on the numbers. Or in other words, get creative. Let that no longer, if you're going to go with luck, improving your luck, now you know you can open up a second location with a very profitable product. Would that be a good example of using numbers?
Yeah, I like your example of, say, your best product. It might not be the most profitable product. We would call that a leader. There are a lot of retail stores that do this. Restaurants do it as well. They do something that everybody likes, and they do a really good price, and that's to get people in the store. Hopefully, they'll buy other stuff and they'll make money. Now, there's no problem with doing that as long as you make the decision. The sad part is if you don't know you're losing money, and so you just keep losing money, and you could have raised the price. Or you could have recognized, what you're doing, and you might have raised the price and then given discounts on it so people would actually feel like they're getting a better deal. You see, there are all kinds of strategies that you might choose to do if you knew that it was not profitable. And a lot of times people just raise the price. So typically, if it's not really undervalued, you can raise the price a little bit and start making a little bit of money. And if it's every 4th or 5th meal, and you make money when you were losing money, now all of a sudden that drops to your bottom line, and you might double your profit just on a single good product like that. So you have to pay attention. You have to know what your good products are. Not only should you know your highest volume, you should also know your highest gross margin per product.
And when thinking of that, it kind of gave me an idea, or just a comment is, if you're not making any money out of these item, but it's the one that brings in the people, then gluing it to something or marrying it to one of the highest grossing profit items, like a special drink, maybe some combo or something within that nature,
Right.
to be able to then go ahead and start making some profit out of that.
Well,
and maybe training the staff would be important at that point, saying, hey, offer this with every single item, otherwise we're losing money. And then you have more productive management meetings based on that.
That's right. And the other thing you can do is you can get people to do add-ons that either create more value or they create more margin. So you can make these decisions. I guarantee you, McDonald's does not make any decisions that does not include this discussion about how you price items. They know exactly how they bend the demand curve based on every Happy Meal and how many additions they can get to that, and whether or not people decide to supersize, etc. They understand exactly what that does to volume. if you're not utilizing those tools, and I'm not suggesting every restaurant has to do that kind of thing at all. I'm not saying there are a lot of business people, restaurant owners that just don't want to. They don't want to live like that. They don't want to be like that. But you need to have a basic understanding of where you're making money and where you're not making money, so that you can make alterations. You may make the same decision, but at least you'll know that you made the decision and it's purposeful. The ones who make purposeful decisions, again, they tend to be the ones who are left after 5 years. Yes, there are a few of those mud on the wall kind of businesses that survive, but that's a small part of the ones who are still there after 5 years. That's maybe 5% of the ones that are left are actually there, and they don't even know why. They just think they're brilliant, but and they may have been on one aspect, but they weren't brilliant business people. They were brilliant cooks, or they chose the right location, or they by mistake they got next to the convention center or something like that. That didn't make them brilliant at all, but it did mean that they survived.
And I ran into this situation where, yes, Edgar, we do want to change. We do want to have reports. We do want to do this. It's just that we don't know where to start. Do we get software? Do we train our people, our CPA? It's too expensive to hire them full time to break down these things. And often, I think I asked this question in one of the other videos, but if maybe we can focus on saying, what would you tell a person today that I went literally and visited for lunch? Say, I want to do all that. I just don't know where to start. I have a great CPA. I got a ADP, a bookkeeper. I got all that good stuff, but that's not what I'm looking for. I want to market, but I don't think she meant she wants us to do flyers and billboards. I think she means exactly that. I want to know what to market to. I want to know what the next step is to report. And that's really the mistranslation of what marketing is. It's like, yeah, marketing is, you need graphic designers, you need great eye-catching stuff, but who are you going to market to? Right. And how do we know who to market to if we don't know what items can we market, because those are the profitable ones?
Right.
What would you tell this and this is a real scenario. I just met them today. They're a great family, and literally said, I've been working all my life. I don't own a business. I own a job. She said it. I didn't have to tell her to her. How do I turn this into a business? I have intuition, but just don't know where to begin. And I told software, but I was like,
Well, there's a remarkable amount of information available for free today, like what people are watching right now.
Too much information out there, and
well, there may be too much information, and so I would say that the biggest problem is, which is your question, what should I learn, and where should I go in order to learn that? There's a lot of information out there, and there are some basic things that are important. I think the reason that I like a break even in a cash flow analysis is that those are really important. As we mentioned earlier, cash is the lifeblood of any business, and you must learn to manage cash. If you can't manage cash, you're not going to be in business. And so that's the very first thing to do. And some people just look at their bank account and they don't spend any money if they don't have their bank account. However, that doesn't help you decide to open your second store. So you've got a whole bunch of money in the bank and you go, well, I guess there's enough to open a store. Well, you could have opened it 5 years ago. You've been working for 5 or 10 or 15 years to make enough money to open another store. You could have done that earlier had you understood a little bit more about the whole scope of business and management and how that really works. So the whole purpose of Microgiants, by the way, is to provide a venue. It's a small one. To provide these kinds of tools specifically for small business, for real small businesses, not the ones with 500 people, the way SBA categorizes a small business. I'm talking about the ones with 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 people in it. And another way is to join a group of CEOs, a CEO group. Yeah. I have some clients who've used those over the years. They get together and they try and help each other through problems. The interesting potential downside of that is that while each one of those people have survived and are in business. They're not necessarily an expert, but they have an opinion. And so the opinion for their business may not work for your business. And in fact, the other guy who you're talking to only has experience in one business. He's not a serial entrepreneur. He hasn't looked at several businesses. He hasn't studied it. So for that reason, I think that good consultants can be a real asset to help make decisions, but they're hard to find. Just as in small businesses fail because they don't understand what they're doing, there are lots of consultants that don't understand what they're doing. And that's kind of a problem. And I've never really seen a way to fix that other than to make sure that you get referrals from other folks who have already had really good experiences, and there've been people who have actually been able to help their business. Collaborative network I know it's something that you can do and are doing to tie people into resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that a great place to start would be to sort of master the break-even and cash flow tools along with your financial statements that you get from your CPA, and make sure you understand those. It may take some people a while to try and get the feel for that, but you need to plug the numbers in, you need to try it, you need to do it again, you need to go to people and ask them, you need to bug your CPA, you need to say, look, I did a break-even analysis here, and I to look at it and tell me where I went wrong. So, I mean, you have to be overt, I think, in terms of pushing forward. And you'll learn, not everything is good information, but you'll learn what's good for you. You've heard this story, but I don't know if this audience has. I'll never forget. I was very fortunate. I got to work for a retailer, a specialty retailer, when I was in business school, and I worked there for 4 years before I got an offer to open up my own store. And simultaneously I got a business degree. And I'll never forget the day that I went back to a business book in order to try and figure out a problem that I had. And it was 5 years later. So I had learned everything I needed to know from the owner of my employer for the first 5 years. There wasn't anything that I learned in business school that I needed to know for 5 years. Ironically, that was cash flow. And that is when I endeavored to figure out how to do cash flow. It wasn't easy. It took me years to figure it out because you know what? Cash flow is not in most accounting books. The sources and uses of funds is a financial statement. That's not the same thing. That's not what we went through in the last couple of weeks. And so because cash is the lifeblood of any business, it's really important to understand how to manage cash. And I would start there. If you can keep the cash in the bank, chances of you going out of business are so much reduced. And surprisingly, you don't have to make any money, profit, to stay in business. You only have to make enough money to pay your bills. That's cash flow, two different things. So take a look at Lyft. You know, they just announced that they're going to try and make some money this year. So, you know, why is that? Well, because they gave them so much money to start up. They've just been, you know, burning through the cash that they had. They didn't care about making money. Now I can guarantee you they're paying a lot of attention to numbers. Those are number intensive businesses and highly sophisticated kinds of businesses. But a little guy can't do that. You know, people don't have 3 or 4 or 5 years of cash and capital to sustain them through bad times very often. I know that I never started a business with that much cash. I started most of my businesses with almost no cash. And so it's possible to do. It's done a lot. The problem is when you're successful, you start growing. Then you need to understand why you grew. And you need to understand what's going to happen to your cash when you make another decision. Or when something, God forbid, like COVID happens, If you don't have a lot of cash, it's going to be very tough to be able to get through this. It's going to be, it's going to be horrible. It's devastating. It's devastating.
I gotta say that it's so far, I know I've been introduced to that formula, the break even. And right away when I grabbed it, it blew my mind. I took it, I went and started collecting the numbers, the data from the business that we get to, or the I guess the mission we get to work with, which is the school in Mexico. And we started dumping those numbers in the break even. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna be great at this. Like, no big deal. This is so easy. When I started playing with it, I was like, Ron, what am I doing wrong? Why am I struggling here? Why is my brain having a hard time wrapping around this? So what I'm trying to say is I didn't stop there. I didn't just give up on it. I went back and tried again, tried again, tried again. I've so far connected with maybe a couple of CPAs and I mean, not attorneys, so CPAs and bookkeepers in the United States to see anybody willing to help on this. It's not that they were not willing to help. It was just, this is not what they do, the services they do. And then I've been, okay, well, let me figure a way how to systemize this. And I haven't given up until maybe 2 months ago. I think I finally figured a way how to animate, excuse me. There's the Latino side kicking in. The system in such way where we can actually have reporting for the school in a way where we can bring in, say, there's our break even on each little bit items. And it's been a project that if I had no idea it existed, I don't think we ever were going to do it. But now that we know, now it's becoming more natural. It's almost like I was pushing a rock up a hill.
Yeah.
And I've gone there. That was the hard part. All I have to do is flick it out and let momentum take over. And I feel like that's the point where we took, because it took a lot longer to get there because there were so many moving parts. But for businesses, my recommendation, if anything, for businesses that don't have that many moving parts, and by that I mean you are a restaurant, you're not a restaurant and offer other services, you offer food, maybe it's not a bad time to dedicate some time into the development of learning these formulas.
Yeah.
Because what I got out of your question, because my question was actually what systems do we use, but you went on to a better route. And in reality, I think that's when it comes to us to make the decision, what systems do we implement, knowing that the goal is to have these type of reports in our business. Otherwise, we are going to make it and think we're successful. But if we're successful, could it be because of the mud analogy, right? We'll never know. Let's actually find out. And instead of watching Tiger King and all these episodes, maybe dedicate an hour to watching the video of the break even and learning a little bit about what it is.
Well, you're right. And I'll tell you what, a business person that's going to spend time watching too much television is probably not going to be successful. I would be willing to say I worked on 90 hours a week for the first 10 years of my life. And that was because I had to learn everything while I was running the business. And when it was new, I didn't have any help. I had to do everything by myself. I had to grow it so that I could hire people. So, I mean, small business people, again, the survivors are the ones that work like crazy. If you don't have a tendency to focus your mind on your business 20 hours a day, you're going to have a less of an opportunity to be successful. Having said that, once you learn it and you understand it and you've got these tools under your belt, you don't really have to work that much. And I would argue that the job of an owner is to not work at all. Not that you want to live a perfect life, but that you want to be such a good manager that the only thing you have to do, say every month, is to sit down with your key people and go through your financials, your break-even points, your cash flow forecasts, and 10 or 20 other good management reports that indicate what your business is about. And that's remote control. That's how big businesses run their business, because they learn to manage from the numbers. Yes, it's important to stay in touch with your people. You want to walk the floor, you want to be there. I'm not suggesting any of that's not a good thing to do, but I know it's very possible. I ran 7 stores on Tuesday morning.
This conversation, that's what I like doing these with not much of an agenda, but an agenda to it, I guess you can say. It's probably one of my favorite interviews so far. We have about 10 minutes. We do have somebody in the audience, so I wanted to respect their time and not go too much over and respect your time. But I did want to say if we were to end it with something, back here I have an empty bookshelf. We're at the Collaborative Networks headquarters in the downtown San Bernardino Enterprise building. When one of the advices I received that changed my entire life. I was having lunch with Tom Nightingale. I maybe sat with him once, but he kind of changed my life with that one word he said that blew my mind. He said, "I read a book a week." I was like, I don't. How do you do that? And since that day, all I've been doing is reading a book a week to try to catch up to what everybody's talking about.
Yeah.
And so when I started working with microgiants, with not working but connecting with you, I've learned that all we were talking about is these books that you guys read to be able to understand or give you the better language, a lingo, a way to come talk about these subjects. And so my goal is to fill up this bookshelf with mentors in the books that you are being recommended. So far, I've read two of the books you've already mentioned through the Microgiant, which was The Millionaire Next Door and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
Again, it keeps changing my perspective, keeps making, and I think that's that one rock we're talking about. You also have a book that I wanted to make sure people know that it's out there, which is something that I need to put on there. And the idea behind it, I wanted maybe you could talk about your book, what it's about, and I want to see if maybe we can have people have access to your mind through your book potentially.
Okay, sure. It's called Finding Your Crack in the Market. And I mean, other than what we've talked about already in those reports, I think the next most important thing is that you're in the right place at the right time. We all exist in some sort of a market. Some of them are geographical in nature. Some of them are product oriented in nature. And there are 6 or 7 other kinds of markets that are out there that you can actually define. But if you take a look, in fact, I've studied small businesses for about 22 years on this subject, and that is, what are the characteristics of those, not the 20% that survive 5 years, but the 5% that become millionaires? What do they do? And there are, believe it or not, there are a series of things that successful people do, and it's all the same thing. They take care, they spend a lot of effort doing what they're doing. They focus their time to do the right things at the right time. They do a lot of reading and investigating in order to be able to assure that they're going the right way and pick the new direction or the proper direction for the future. And then there are a wide variety of a couple of personality types. Most kinds of personalities can be successful in business, but one of the things pertinent to my book, and I go through that in the book, but one of the things that they all do well is that they have the ability, innate or they study it, the ability to see a need in a small market. Many times it's not been satisfied yet. So new companies with new ideas are basically founded by people who have an idea that is a need somebody has. They may not know it yet, but when they see it, they'll know it. Not very many people knew they needed to have an iPhone until Jobs showed us what the iPhone was, and then we all needed one, right?
Yes.
His ability to anticipate what people will want and then find a niche market and how to build it with the expertise that his company had was unparalleled. He was a lousy manager. He was not a pleasant person, but he understood where this was going. And so if you take a look at most of the big companies today, you can really point to the time when they started their business, when there were 1 or 2, maybe 3 of them, and they said, wow, here's what's going to happen. When the founders of Sergio and Brin, the founders of Google, were studying computer science, and the internet was only 4 or 5 years old. they said there has got to be a better way to look stuff up on the internet. The way that we're doing this now is just ridiculous. They were basically nothing but a bunch of catalogs. That's what Yahoo was, is a whole bunch of links. You'd go look up a link by a category, and then they would give you a bunch of links. It didn't make any sense. And what they did is they figured out a natural language way to give you what you want. Well, everybody understands what happened to Google. At the time, it was a small niche. Nobody had solved the problem yet, and they solved it. And they are now among the richest in the entire world for having done that. Same thing with Gutenberg and Facebook. So not Gutenberg, Gutenberg.
Close enough.
Gutenberg. Okay, at any rate, so now this happens on a small level too. When I was in business, started my first retail store, I did exactly the same thing. I didn't quite understand that's what I was doing at the time, but I knew that in the physical geographical location where our stores were going to be, that we were going to be different and unique. We had developed a product set that was not available everywhere. And it was not available but one place in the entire city of Denver where I started. And so, and they only did part of it. And so I was in a totally different place. We did things that were different all the time, as much as we could possibly do, and we did different things. The stores looked different, the windows were different, the music was different, everything was different, to hone in on the customer and literally chase away those who we did not want as customers. It was very focused. I didn't know that we were building a niche, and that we were finding our crack in the marketplace. But that's what we were doing. I talk about that in the book, and then I talk about how that went away. How as we grew and grew, other people noticed we were there. We raised our heads. They tried to shoot it off, and they effectively slowed our growth dramatically over a period of 4 or 5 years. So had we been able to stay in a smaller niche and not grown as much, we might have been able to continue on. But that's what we talk about. Every successful restaurant has a niche. Every small business has a niche. And the problem that we have is that people choose to go into business, and then they choose a niche that's already filled up. And that's like competing, with a bunch of minnows. It's like you're a minnow and you're going to be thrown in with a whole bunch of minnows, and how are you going to survive? And, chances are it's going to be the bigger goldfish that eats all of the minnows. And that's, so finding your crack in the marketplace is really, really a place to start. I'm not trying to sell the book. I just happen to believe that. That's why I spent I spent 5 years writing the book, because I thought it was that important. But then also going back to what you say, is it's really important to do a lot of reading. I do the same thing. I don't know if this is going to be effective, but if you look behind me.
Oh man, your bookshelf.
Over here,
Jesus.
These are half the books. I have downstairs in my library, I have as many or more books downstairs, and I've read almost every one of them. And I'm not as fast of a reader, but I'm probably a lot older than the guy who you mentioned who read one every week. One other thing that I do that is harder to do now, and that is I try and look for the one book that business just thinks is fabulous, and I make sure that I read every one of those. But it's harder to find those today. Jim Collins from Good to Great is one of them, and Tom Peters is another one who has several good books. Megatrends is an old book by a guy by the name Nesbitt. Some of these are pretty old books, but they're still pertinent today. And then there are those hard to read books that might take 6 months to read, that are sort of like case studies, strategy, strategic planning, those kinds of things. I don't think an average business has to learn those things necessarily, but I had to as a consultant. I had to understand all the aspects. So yeah, I spent my time doing that and listening to tapes back when tapes were still you know.
No, that's awesome. Well, the collaborative networks compass, which I call it the financial freedom compass or the entrepreneur compass, it's really based on all the physical mentors that I've met. There's about 5 of you guys there in this local area of the Southern California, and each one of you contribute to helping out creating this community, indirectly or directly. That's really the truth. So that's why I like talking as collaborative networks as a community-based organization, because it was multiple minds that came together to help build this culture that potentially is based off your knowledge of you guys and books that they recommended and everything. So the symbol is more like the introduction to anybody, those books that I have, which was Rich Dad Poor Dad, Start With Why, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the E-Myth, Eaters Eat Last. Those are the ones that I noticed that are really popular, very popular titles, but they do have each one these little pieces you can take to give you some sort of general idea of how these entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, think. And I think that's one of the biggest parts is givers gain. Don't do something that you want to sell to people, but sell to the people their need, what they want. If selling is misdefined as somebody deceiving, no, it's somebody providing value. And the concept is, in absence of value, price is always an issue. And so that's kind of where all these things, having purpose, having principles, and having structure, learning where to go, where you're going, or one of my favorite sayings from Bernie Powers, and I'll eventually see if I can bring him here one day, is if you don't know where you're going, any road will lead you there. I just translated that to Spanish, and it was hilarious. I loved it how it said it, but it's if you don't know where you're going, any horse will take you there. That was kind of the translation. But at the end of it all, I'm gonna put some of these books on maybe this video. I wanted to put yours maybe somewhere right here, and recommend people to read them, and go from there. I did. I think we have. We went over our hour with you, and actually
we were
a lot more than that. But I wanted to say thank you again. Wrap it up. See if we can edit this version, put it on YouTube as soon as possible. It's for a condensed version with a lot of ums or ahs for me. And then at the end of it all, see if next week we can continue these conversations. But overall, for the micro giants, I don't think I'm going to put it this time on the website, on the comments below for the YouTube channel. But what's the website for the micro giants? So I can put it somewhere on the.
It's just microgiants.biz, B-I-Z.
That biz, and then
we'll put links on as soon as you get it posted. We'll put links on microgiants.
Okay, I'll put some links, and then I do recommend everybody go listen to those articles. Read those articles on the microgiant. They're in your website, correct?
Yeah, they're in the blog section of microgiants.
Oh, and your book. Where can we buy your book? Is it something Amazon? I'll make sure I put that on there.
Finding a Crack in the Market. We named it specifically so there wouldn't be too many who copied it, and so far nobody has. So it's pretty easy to find if you type the whole title out.
Yeah, and maybe we could turn that.
If you put Burgess, you definitely find it.
It'd be awesome if we could translate that to Spanish. That would be amazing. So we'll talk about that later.
All right.
All right, Ron. Thank you so much again, and
appreciate it. It's always fun.
No, I love you this. Thank you so much, and whoever was watching, hopefully you enjoy this. If not, we're gonna try to get this thing condensed version of it on YouTube as soon as possible. The link for YouTube, or the name is Collaborative Networks on YouTube. I believe we're the only channel. If you scroll down a little bit, we'll show up on there. Subscribe, obviously, it will help us kind of keep you updated with these. And we want to keep them going. Create any ideas, anything like that, put comments. We're streaming live on Facebook. If you've seen this now, feel free to put some comments on some suggestions, some topics. We're trying to get some real data from a real restaurant suffering today to plug it into an actual break even. So we want to kind of put that in front of you hopefully next week. Like that, we can start getting an idea of these formulas again. And don't forget, every Thursday at 2 is where we're meeting. and we're gonna continue doing these up until Ron tells me no. So, so every
Well,
Thursday till
it'll
we
be,
have no more Ron to join.
it'll be a while. Of course, you will get tired of me before I'm tired.
Oh no, I don't think that would be the case. All right, Ron, thank you so much,
Yeah,
and you
thanks
guys
very
have a
much.
great day. Thank you for
See you.
joining. All
Bye-bye.
right, bye.